Mr. Janmejaya Sinha, the Boston Consulting Group's chairman of Asia Pacific. Mr. Sinha is also a member of firm's executive committees and the Bruce Henderson Institute's Innovation Sounding Board, which supports, inspires and guides upstream innovation at BCG. He has been awarded fellowships from different universities. He has also authored books like Own the Future, 50 Ways to Win, and Your Strategy Needs a Strategy. Mr. Janmejaya Sinha reveals a different perspective which reflects his tremendous potential, thriving innovation and visionary advances to alter lives of millions. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Janmejaya Sinha to reveal his experience of triumph.
Good evening. Thank you so much for such a warm welcome. It is my great privilege to come here for your Silver Jubilee celebrations. Actually, I have to talk on how India's growth can be impacted by digitization and digital. And let me begin by just telling you the fact that we are really living in a digital age. About 12 hours ago, I was in a different continent and I've managed to make connections and come to Indore. And it just shows you how fast the world is going. So if we are going to talk about how India will be impacted by digital, first I think it's useful for us to spend a moment trying to understand what these new terms really mean. What does digitization mean? And I think, everywhere I go, people are using these terms. And every so often, I really want us to just sit and hold back and say, so what does this mean? And to my mind, digitization is a combination of four things. Today, if you take out your smartphone, it has more computing power than Apollo 11 had to get to the moon. So the savage computing power that is available at your fingertip is one part of it. The second part of it is the fact that everywhere in the world there is ubiquitous connectivity. I come from Bihar. So if you want to talk about a poor and a backward state, you're looking at it. And yet, you just think of it, every village in Bihar is connected. And then, you look at data storage and you imagine cupboards and you imagine paper. But do you know that in the next 2 years, 90% of the information that will be existing in the world will happen in the next 2 years. So just think about the 5,000 years of human history and all the information that we are collecting in the last 3 years is 90% of the information that we have. So storage has become ubiquitous. And now with the cloud, you walk with storage. So think about it. You have enormous computing power. You have ubiquitous connectivity. You have unlimited storage. And you have it on the move. So then what does this mean? What does this really mean? How might this impact us? And I just want to take 5 or 6 trends and then bring them to India. So today, when you step out from here, and if you happen to be well known in Indore, be careful, don't be naughty. Don't. Because anything that you do will instantaneously be globally public. We live in a world of intrusive, intense global scrutiny, like a time never before. This level of transparency changes the way we have to operate and act. You can't be hidden somewhere doing what you wanted to. Everything that you are doing is public. And the head of Cisco's chief security officer of Cisco once told me that the only privacy that you have is somebody else's disinterest. So the moment you become interesting, you have no privacy. This is the world that we are operating in. Right? The second thing is, you talk about marketing. Let me tell you a small story. My son lives in London, and he bought a sofa. And it didn't get delivered, then it was delivered incorrectly, then they sent the wrong cushions with it. And he called the call center, he wrote a letter of complaint, nothing happened. And then, what do you think he did? He posted it on Facebook. Within 24 hours, the company was calling him. They delivered the sofa in 3 days with a 25% discount. Think about it. So, the nature of marketing has changed completely. So when you put out all those placards and you put out, advertisements in newspapers and TV ads, is that the way to do it? It's an important question. My boss was at a dinner a month ago with Angela Merkel, and Larry Page of Google was also there. And Angela Merkel went to Larry Page and says, "Do you want to know why I don't trust you?" So poor Larry Page was quite worried. Why does Angela Merkel, Chancellor of Germany, not trust him? She said, I never shop, but I had to go for one banquet and I didn't have shoes. So I went and bought shoes, which I Googled. And every time I go on Google, you all present shoe options to me. How do you know? I don't trust you. So when we think about marketing, it's changed. And you think about risk. Bankers, if you went to a bank, what did they think about in terms of risk? They would think about whether you would pay them back or not, what we'd call credit risk. Or they would talk about market risk, how volatile the market would be. But today, the paramount risk for banks, the paramount risk for you, the paramount risks for the world is cyber risk. So all these movies that you see from Hollywood, they can actually be real. And they can be crippling. 5 countries, the US, China, Russia, Iran and Israel, already have military capabilities with cyber. When Russia invaded Ukraine, people say they had already taken out their anti-aircraft guns. This is the nature of the new war, cyber. And we will all be subject to it. Every American bank has been hit by people, saboteurs. Every American bank. So you think about the nature of marketing, the nature of risk, the nature of scrutiny. These are very commonplace things. And they are all changing. They are changing in a dramatic way. And then, how does it really start to have an impact? I would offer 2 other important factors to look at. Every one of you who's in business, and I know there are a lot of students here who want to get into business, you have to understand the way business is changing. And the way business is changing, for the first time in one's entire life, is happening in a different way. Earlier, industries segments used to compete with each other. So banks would compete with each other. Camera makers would compete with each other. But you would not compete outside your industry boundary. Today that has changed. And let me explain to you how it has changed through a story. I spent the first 10 years of my life with the Reserve Bank. And then I shifted into consulting. And my first consulting assignment in 1996 was in Rochester, New York. And it was with a company called Kodak. Have you all heard of it? Kodak? Kodak today doesn't exist. But in 1996, it was one of the top brands in the world. And in 1996, we were asked to look at Kodak and say, how long can they stay with silver halide? Those pictures. And we had projected that by about 2004, the digital camera will actually see the profound shift. So 90% of pictures would be taken on digital cameras. Actually, our predictions were too slow. That already started to happen by 2002. But what no one knew was what would happen to the digital camera industry. Because out there on the west coast of the US, somebody was trying to make a phone. And they added, by complete accident, an additional feature, a phone, a camera in the phone. And today, 93% of pictures are taken on mobile phones. The digital camera industry is in doldrums. So you got killed by accident. By the way, no one planned it. You were dead. And think of the number of things that this does. When you used to buy a music system, you used to look for a 6 CD changer or a DVD player. Now if you buy a music system, you'll just get sockets. And in fact, no one buys music systems anymore. You just buy iTunes. And you buy an amplifier. And it's all happening from outside industry. Will financial services exist? Will banks exist in the future? Earlier on, there were regulators because there were banks. Regulators were created. Why? To oversee banks. Because they were banks, they were regulators. Today, there are banks because there are regulators. And what do I mean by that? If the RBI was not there, the banks would not survive. Do you think anyone would do payments by going into a bank? The most incompetent and inefficient place to go to. Have you had a recent banking experience? If you've had, I'm sure it's been bad. Because banks don't care about customers, they only care about regulators, and regulators save them. That entire industry is dead, but for the regulator. Payments, deposits, credit. How will it happen in the future? Will it happen the same way? Unlikely. So what's happening is, if you go to a Kirana store here, who do you think his competition is? It's not Carrefour, it's not Walmart, it'll be Amazon. That's how business is reinventing. And so whichever business you are in, you have to ask yourself, what part of my business has now become redundant? That it cannot carry on being done in the way that it was. The second thing that you have to ask yourself is, what does transparency bring into my business? If you put light on something, if you're a chairman of a bank, you can know what your lowest relationship manager is doing that day. And so that type of transparency starts to transform organizations. And it also brings in a new focus. So when you think of, put all this together, the new nature of risk, the new nature of marketing, the new nature of business, and the new nature of business threats. And then you ask yourself, So what does this do for India? How will India benefit or lose from this? What does it need? How will it go forward? So a lot of this is liberating. A lot of this is liberating because you can be small, you can be an entrepreneur somewhere hidden, and you can make it. But you can't yet because the basic infra is not quite there. The basic infrastructure is missing. Your bandwidth is not as good as it should be. Call drops are everywhere. You still have 60% of Indians on non-smartphones. So last week I was on the Global Business Summit in Delhi, and Janmejaya Sinha was on that podium too. So I said, should you be asking, there were some telco operators there, should we be asking government to subsidize smartphones? Not for the smartphone operators, but for the kind of second order effects that it creates. How do you consume with a smartphone is very different. So just think about healthcare, education, government services, just for 3 areas. How might this transform? Today we have in India, just in the states of Bihar and UP, just in the states of Bihar and UP, 200 million kids under the age of 15, and most of them are poorly educated. How can we galvanize and catalyze this group? We cannot do this with traditional methods. It is not possible. But we have in our power what is needed to actually reach them and make them learn on their own. The nature of pedagogy has to change. And it has to be embedded. It has to be digitally embedded. We have to think differently. With the 1.1 million schools in India, what is their minimum standard? It's awful. How can we think afresh about how this pedagogy changes? How do we actually make it such that you are projecting into classrooms, that you are actually creating an interactive elements with them from a central place? How do we actually think about this? How do we do this with healthcare? How do we do this with government services? So when we start thinking like that, then we can start talking about how we take truly advantage of our good macroeconomics today. Because today there are only 2 countries in the world, maybe 4, that look nice. The US, India, possibly Turkey, countries which are not commodity exporters, countries which have a basic, and China is fine, but China will be slowing down and so it will be looking a bit uncomfortable. But otherwise, India currently has got, growth, it has got a very good current account situation, it has low inflation, it has almost everything that from a macro perspective is required. But we don't have the soft skills and we are not ready yet. So the way I want to think about digital is not the way that you might have asked me to. People would tend to say, what is the opportunity in technology? What will this do for the country? Actually, how can we use technology to embed ourselves into uplifting the social needs of India? Education, healthcare, basic government services. The subsidy bill, how can it be reduced and yet become more effective? How do we think afresh with regard to what we can do with using the full magnitude of technology to upskill our entire population and take them into middle class? That is the challenge and the opportunity which comes together. So we need to know what digital can do. But by just knowing what it can do, it will not happen. It will happen too slowly. And we are running on a time bomb because we have such young people who are all connected. You can say somebody is living in a village. Actually, they are not living in a village anymore. They are all connected. Everyone's watching the same TV programs, even if they are watching it on their phone. And they have the same aspirations as every one of us in this room. And if we don't meet those aspirations, we will see the ISISes of the world happening in India. Have no doubt. No one is willing to wait anymore. And how we galvanize ourselves to take advantage of this huge opportunity is the challenge of our times. The opportunity is great. Our ability to capture that opportunity is actually not hard, but we need the will to be able to move forward in that. So, as Gandhi said, what we do today will determine how we will be tomorrow. Nothing else. We can do it, but we must want to do it, and we must be able to take the steps in doing it. The opportunity is fantastic, it's transformational, and it can actually affect poverty in ways that we cannot even imagine. It is the future, but will we take it? It's for all of us to collectively decide. Thank you.